Hello. Settle in comfortably, wrap yourself up warmly, and let the gentle whisper of stories carry you into a deep, peaceful sleep. The year is 1843. A new dawn breaks over the nascent American frontier, not with quiet peace, but with the rumble of wagon wheels and the restless stir of ambition. For thousands, the call of the West, of fertile lands and new beginnings, became an undeniable siren song. This was the inaugural year of what would become the Great Migration along the Oregon Trail, a 2,000-mile odyssey from Independence, Missouri, to the verdant Willamette Valley. Imagine standing amidst that chaotic excitement, the air thick with the promise of destiny, but also with a palpable undercurrent of apprehension. These early settlers, largely farmers and artisans from the Midwest, were embarking on a journey fraught with peril. Their primary concern, beyond sheer survival, was often overlooked in the grand narrative. How would they ensure a safe night's sleep in a hostile, untamed wilderness? The logistics of such a journey were staggering. A typical wagon train consisted of 20 to 100 wagons, each carrying an average of 4 to 6 individuals along with provisions and household goods, weighing up to 2,500 pounds. While daily mileage typically ranged from 10 to 15 miles, the vast, unbroken wilderness presented a nightly challenge. Expert analyses of settler journals, such as those compiled by John M. Farragher in Women and Men on the Overland Trail, reveal a consistent emphasis on security. The circle camp, or corral camp, became the standard defensive formation. Upon halting for the night, wagons were meticulously positioned side by side, forming a protective ring. This wasn't merely for convenience. It was a strategically sound maneuver designed to deter potential threats and manage livestock effectively. The oxen and horses vital to the journey's continuation were often herded within this protective enclosure, or hobbled and tethered just outside, under constant watch. This formation served a dual purpose: a physical barrier against opportunistic Native American raids, though historical accounts indicate these were far rarer and less aggressive than popular myth suggests, and a psychological comfort against predatory animals like wolves and coyotes, which were a more frequent nuisance. It also provided a controlled space for cooking and socializing, bringing a semblance of order to the wild expanse. The first scent of dust stirred by these pioneers was not just the beginning of a journey. It was the genesis of a meticulously planned existence, driven by the fundamental need for safety amidst the unknown. As the sun dipped below the vast horizon, painting the prairie in hues of orange and purple, the tactical formation of the wagon train became more than just a logistical arrangement. It became a psychological bulwark. With the wagons forming their protective circle, the immediate threat of the unknown was held at bay, but the deeper anxieties of the settlers lingered, carried on the whispers of the wind. These were the fears woven deeply into the fabric of 19th century frontier life, concerns rooted in both reality and pervasive cultural narratives. The most exaggerated, yet deeply ingrained fear was that of Indian attack. While popular literature and sensationalized accounts often depicted Native Americans as uniformly hostile, historical data from organizations like the National Park Service and detailed analyses by scholars such as William G. Thomas III in The Relative Safety of the Oregon Trail paint a more nuanced picture. Of the estimated 400,000 to 500,000 emigrants who traveled the Oregon and California trails between 1840 and 1860, approximately 400 deaths resulted from altercations with Native Americans. This statistic, though tragic, pales in comparison to the estimated 10,000 to 30,000 deaths attributed to disease, accidents, and other causes. Nonetheless, the fear was potent. Settler journals frequently mention heightened vigilance at night, with men taking turns on guard duty, muskets at the ready. This constant state of alert, fueled by perceived dangers rather than frequent actual threats, speaks volumes about the psychological toll of the journey. Beyond human adversaries, the wilderness itself posed myriad threats. The howls of wolves and the occasional sighting of bears and mountain lions were a genuine concern for livestock and, by extension, for the settlers' very survival. Nighttime offered cover for these predators, making vigilant protection of the valuable draft animals and horses paramount. A stray bullet could easily kill or wound, and the risk of accidental discharge was ever present, especially among inexperienced hands tasked with guard duty in the dark. The constant vigilance was a necessity, not just against explicit threats, but also against the sheer unpredictability of an untamed environment where every rustle in the grass or distant cry could signal danger. The whispers in the wind were often just that, wind, but in the minds of those far from civilization, they could easily transform into the sounds of approaching peril, cementing the need for a meticulously guarded nighttime routine. Before the rhythmic creak of wagon wheels became the soundtrack of their existence, and the nightly chore of forming the protective circle defined their evenings, settlers faced a profound moment of decision. This was the true beginning of their journey, not on the dusty trails, but in the heart of their established lives. The farewell to comfort. For families leaving states like Ohio, Illinois, or Kentucky, the decision to embark on the Oregon Trail was not merely a change of location. It was a wholesale rejection of familiarity and safety, a severance of ties with settled civilization. Historian John D. Unruh Jr.'s seminal work, The Plains Across, meticulously details the incredible logistical and psychological preparation required. Settlers literally weighed their futures. The practicalities were staggering. Oxen, not horses, were the preferred draft animals due to their endurance and ability to subsist on prairie grasses, but they were slow. Supplies had to be carefully selected, often based on guidebooks like those by Lansford Hastings or Samuel Parker, which offered varying degrees of accuracy. Every possession carried into the wagon represented a deliberate choice, often at the expense of a treasured heirloom or a household convenience. Space was at an absolute premium. A typical wagon, measuring perhaps 4 feet wide and 10 feet long, was home, transport, and storage for months on end. What did this mean for sleeping? It meant a radical departure from the fixed beds and secure dwellings of home. The prospect of sleeping exposed to the elements, or within the confining, often cramped canvas covers of the wagon, was a stark reality. Imagine a family of 5 attempting to sleep within their limited wagon space amidst barrels of flour, tools, and personal effects. Often, only the very young, the infirm, or mothers with infants consistently slept inside. Most able-bodied men, and often older children, slept under the stars or beneath the wagon, a decision driven as much by comfort, seeking cooler air and more space, as by practical necessity for guard duty and quick response to emergencies. This early detachment from physical comfort served as a brutal yet essential preparation for the sustained rigors and inherent dangers of the 2,000-mile journey ahead. It underscored that safety on the Oregon Trail would rarely align with comfort. As the camp settled into its nightly quiet, the echoes of home, though distant, often returned with startling clarity. For the pioneers, even amidst the vastness of the prairie and the ever-present requirement for vigilance against tangible threats, the psychological landscape of sleep was complex. Dreams of familiar hearths and comfortable beds warred with the stark reality of sleeping on rough ground, under a canvas cover, or directly beneath the overwhelming canopy of stars. This internal struggle was a constant companion through long nights. The psychological impact of sleeping in an exposed, unfamiliar environment cannot be overstated. Diaries and letters from emigrants frequently recount the unsettling silence, broken only by the snorts of oxen, the cry of a night bird, or the rustling of wind through sparse vegetation. For individuals accustomed to enclosed, secure dwellings, this exposure was not merely physical, it was deeply unsettling. The lack of privacy, the proximity of strangers, and the constant awareness of potential dangers, be they animal, human, or elemental, often led to restless nights. Dr. Susan G. Boutrouille, in her historical analysis of women's experiences on the trail, highlights how women, in particular, often struggled with the loss of domestic security, a sentiment frequently expressed in their longing for the four walls and a roof of their abandoned homes. Despite the hardships, settlers actively sought to recreate a semblance of domesticity within the confines of their nightly encampments. Blankets and quilts, often treasured family possessions, provided not only warmth, but also a vital connection to home. Children, tucked into makeshift beds within the wagon, perhaps with a cherished toy, were shielded physically and emotionally as much as possible. These small acts of preserving familiarity served as psychological anchors against the enormity of the journey. The physical act of preparing for sleep each night, building a small fire, arranging their bedrolls, and huddling together, was a ritual that reinforced community and resilience. Even in the depths of the wilderness, hundreds of miles from the world they knew, the search for safety extended beyond the physical perimeter of the wagon circle. It permeated the very dreams and doubts that accompanied them through the night. Dawn broke with a purpose on the Oregon Trail. The quiet of the pre-dawn hours, occasionally punctuated by the uneasy stirs of guard duty or the distant cries of wildlife, quickly gave way to a cacophony of preparations. This was the overture to another day's journey, the relentless drive westward that defined the settlers' existence. The rattle and hum of progress was not a subtle process. It was a symphony of necessity, demanding discipline and coordination to resume the punishing trek. The daily ritual began well before sunrise, typically between 4 SAM and 5 ULAM AM. Key to the morning's efficiency was breaking camp quickly and safely. Fires, which had provided warmth and a psychological anchor throughout the night, were carefully extinguished, their embers scattered to prevent prairie fires, a constant danger, particularly in dry seasons. Animals, often released to graze during the night, had to be rounded up, watered, and yoked. This process alone could take an hour or more for a large train. Oxen, though slower than horses, provided significant advantages in the harsh terrain, possessing greater stamina and the ability to pull loads up to several thousand pounds over long distances. Their yoking, often a noisy and labor-intensive affair, marked the true start of the day's physical exertion. Wagons, which had formed a defensive circle, were systematically broken down from their overnight configuration. Each family was responsible for dismantling their small part of the perimeter, packing away bedding, cooking utensils, and any personal items that had been brought out. The bedding, often a combination of quilts, wool blankets, and buffalo robes, was rolled and stowed inside the wagon, securing it against dust and the elements. A careful eye was kept on children, who were often tasked with small chores or kept close to avoid wandering into the path of large, unwieldy wagons or restless animals. The disciplined routine, repeated day after day for months, transformed raw, inexperienced travelers into efficient, trail-hardened pioneers. This daily ritual of breaking camp underscored an essential truth. Maintaining safety on the Oregon Trail was a 24-hour commitment where the efficiency of the morning directly impacted the prospects of a secure night. Every successful departure was a small victory, propelling them further west, towards an uncertain but hopeful future. As twilight faded, the methodical task of establishing the night camp began, transforming a temporary halt into a perceived haven. The circular formation of wagons described earlier was not merely for defense, but also served to create a centralized, somewhat sheltered space. Within this ring, the canvas covers of the wagons, often referred to as prairie schooners, offered the primary, albeit often meager, form of private shelter for families. These canvas covers, typically made of heavy-duty cotton duck or linen, were stretched over hickory boughs, creating a waterproof, arched roof. While they offered protection from sun, rain, and light winds, they provided only an illusion of security against the harsh realities of the frontier night. Inside, the space was incredibly confined. For those fortunate enough to sleep within the wagon for the night, makeshift beds were assembled. Often, this involved spreading buffalo robes, quilts, or blankets directly onto the wagon bed, sometimes atop a layer of straw or dried grass for insulation. Dr. Lillian Schlissel's research on women's experiences on the trail indicates that mothers often prioritize the safety and relative comfort of their youngest children within this interior space. Cribs or small cots were non-existent. Infants slept nestled between parents or siblings. The glowing campfires, central to the nightly routine, were a focal point both practically and symbolically. Providing warmth for cooking and warding off the chill of high plains nights, firelight also served as a visible deterrent to wild animals and offered a psychological comfort, pushing back the encroaching darkness. However, these fires also introduced risks. Sparks could ignite dry grass or, more catastrophically, the highly flammable canvas covers of the wagons. Precise protocols were established, and guard rotations included a specific fire watch duty, especially in windy conditions. The illusion of shelter, provided by canvas walls and the comforting flicker of campfire glow, was carefully maintained, a fragile yet vital bulwark against the vast, indifferent wilderness outside the wagon circle. This delicate balance between comfort and omnipresent danger was a nightly reality for the emigrants, shaping their sleep and their very survival. Before the settlers could even contemplate sleep, a more primal need demanded attention: sustenance. After a day of relentless trekking, often 10 to 15 miles across unforgiving terrain, hunger was a gnawing, ever-present reality. The preparation and consumption of the evening meal was not just a chore. It was a critical component of survival, recharging weary bodies for the next day's arduous journey and providing a momentary respite in the communal glow of the campfire. The staple diet on the Oregon Trail was, by modern standards, remarkably monotonous and calorie-dense, designed for maximum energy and minimal spoilage. According to historical records and emigrant guides, provisions for a single adult for the entire 4 to 6 month journey typically included 200 pounds of flour, 150 pounds of bacon, 20 pounds of sugar, 10 pounds of coffee, and limited quantities of rice, beans, dried fruit, and salt. Water, carried in barrels or sourced from rivers, was often unpurified and a frequent cause of illness. The evening meal was usually a variation on a theme: reconstituted dried beans, boiled bacon, or the ever-present hardtack biscuit, sometimes softened in coffee or broth. Fresh meat was a luxury, acquired either by hunting buffalo or deer, or rarely by trading with Native American tribes. This provided a crucial but often irregular protein boost. Cooking methods were rudimentary. Iron pots and skillets, carried beneath the wagons, were brought out and placed over open fires fueled by buffalo chips, dried buffalo dung, or scarce timber. Women, often exhausted from walking alongside the wagons all day, bore the primary responsibility for preparing these meals. Children assisted by gathering fuel or fetching water. The aroma of boiling coffee and frying bacon, though simple, became a powerful sensory marker of security and temporary stability. This hard-won meal, consumed under the vast prairie sky, reinforced a sense of community. Sharing food around the campfire was one of the few social rituals that broke the monotonous grind of the trail, reminding settlers that even in the face of immense hardship, there was a shared humanity and a collective will to persevere. Adequate nutrition, even if basic, was fundamental to maintaining the physical strength necessary to face the myriad challenges and ensure a safe night's rest. While the evening meal provided critical calories, another, often more elusive resource dictated the very possibility of survival and, by extension, a safe night's sleep: water. The taste of water on the Oregon Trail was the taste of life itself, a commodity so precious that its scarcity could shatter the resolve of even the most determined emigrant trains. Its availability profoundly influenced daily travel decisions and nightly encampment strategies. The availability of reliable water sources dictated much of the trail's route. Journals and guidebooks meticulously indexed every known spring, river, and creek, becoming lifeblood maps for the pioneers. For instance, sections like the Sublet Cutoff, a drier, shorter route, were often passed over by those prioritizing consistent access to water, despite the added mileage. When natural sources were abundant, camping near a clear stream allowed for easier cooking, washing, and watering of livestock, reducing the night's chores and anxieties. However, such ideal conditions were often fleeting. More frequently, settlers faced alkaline springs, stagnant pools, or long stretches of desert where water was non-existent. This necessitated carrying water in barrels lashed to the wagons, a heavy burden that further slowed progress and limited cargo capacity. A family of 4 would require at least 5 gallons of water per day for drinking and cooking alone, a significant volume to transport over hundreds of miles. The quality of available water was also a constant concern. Surface water, easily contaminated by animal waste or decaying carcasses, was a primary vector for diseases like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid. Expert analysis of trail mortality rates, such as that by John D. Unruh, Jr., indicates that waterborne illnesses were responsible for the vast majority of deaths along the trail, far more than conflicts with Native Americans. Settlers often resorted to filtering water through cloth or adding coffee grounds, not for purification, but to mask off tastes and odors. A night's rest was far from peaceful if spent battling the symptoms of severe dehydration or gastrointestinal distress, directly impacting vigilance and overall safety. Thus, the careful management and acquisition of water was not merely about quenching thirst. it was about safeguarding the health and vitality of the entire company, ensuring that the journey could continue, one precious, hard-won sip at a time. The Oregon Trail was an unrelenting test of human endurance, pushing bodies to their physical limits day after day. Beyond the visible dangers of swollen rivers and unpredictable weather, the sheer physical toll extracted from each emigrant was perhaps the most constant and pervasive threat to their well-being, directly impacting their ability to find a safe and restorative sleep. Aching bones and calloused hands were not just badges of the journey. They were symptoms of bodies under immense and sustained strain. For most adult settlers, the journey was characterized by an almost ceaseless pedestrian effort. While children and the very ill might ride in the wagons, the vast majority of emigrants, both men and women, walked alongside their animals for the entire 2,000-mile trek. This was a practical necessity. Reducing the weight within the wagons eased the burden on the draft animals and conserved their strength. Walking 10 to 15 miles a day, often over uneven terrain, across rivers, and through baking sun or chilling rain, led to profound physical exhaustion. Blisters, sore muscles, and joint pain were universal complaints recorded in countless diaries. The physical labor extended beyond walking. Men were responsible for yoking and unyoking oxen, repairing wagons, clearing paths, and standing guard. Women managed the household in miniature, cooking, tending to children, washing clothes, a strenuous task often done at riversides with harsh soap, and assisting with camp setup. A study by Merrill J. Matz, a prominent historian of the Oregon Trail, emphasizes the cumulative effect of this labor, noting that minor injuries, if left unattended, could quickly escalate into debilitating conditions in the absence of proper medical care. Sleep, therefore, became a desperate craving, a brief reprieve from the relentless physical demands. Yet, even sleep was often disturbed by the persistent aches and pains, the uncomfortable ground, or the gnawing anxiety of the wilderness. The body under strain required profound rest, a luxury often denied, underscoring how deeply interwoven physical endurance was with the elusive promise of a safe night's sleep on the trail. Beyond the physical exhaustion lay another, perhaps more insidious, adversary: the mind's weariness. The psychological impact of the endless, often monotonous landscape, coupled with constant uncertainty and loss, created a profound mental strain. Battling despair in the vastness of the American West was a daily struggle, directly influencing an emigrant's ability to truly rest, even when physically able. The sheer scale of the journey fostered a sense of insignificance. Day after day, the horizon remained unchanging, mocking the limited progress of the wagon train. Historian David Howard Bain, in Where as a Country, Man, Woman, and Nature on the Oregon Trail, details how this environmental monotony, combined with the extreme physical ordeal, frequently led to bouts of profound depression and anxiety. Journal entries often shifted from optimistic anticipation to a grim recounting of hardships and a desperate longing for the journey's end. The loss of loved ones to disease, particularly cholera, became a devastating psychological blow, chipping away at morale and leaving survivors haunted by grief and fear. Mass graves along the trail, bearing testament to the devastating outbreaks, were grim reminders of their own precarious mortality. Sleep, in such circumstances, was not always a sanctuary. Nightmares of missed opportunities, distant homes, or the recently deceased were common. The quiet of the night, once offering a chance for communal solace around the campfire, could also intensify feelings of isolation and vulnerability when alone with one's thoughts. The constant need for vigilance, even when not actively on guard duty, meant that the mind rarely fully disarmed. Any unusual sound, the shift of an animal, or the groan of a wagon could instantly snap an emigrant awake, further fragmenting an already fragile sleep cycle. This pervasive mental fatigue was a silent killer, subtly eroding judgment, dampening reaction times, and increasing susceptibility to accidents and illness. For the pioneers, safe sleep was not merely about avoiding physical threats. It was about finding a fleeting peace in a mind perpetually on edge, battling the vastness of the landscape and the immense weight of their own doubts and despairs. As darkness descended upon the prairie, the familiar sounds of daytime, the creak of wagons, the shouts of drivers, the lowing of oxen, gave way to a new, often unsettling soundscape. The sounds of the night on the Oregon Trail were a constant symphony of wildness, a concert of rustles, howls, and the hushed movements of human vigilance. These nocturnal noises were more than just ambient background. They were signals, triggers for apprehension, and often direct challenges to the fragile peace of the camp. The primary auditory threats came from the indigenous wildlife. Prairie wolves and coyotes, driven by hunger or territorial instincts, often serenaded the camps with their mournful howls. While rarely a direct threat to adult humans, their presence signified danger for livestock. Horses and oxen, vital to the journey's continuation, could be spooked or even attacked, leading to stampedes or losses. Accounts from emigrant diaries detail nights spent listening to wolves tear at a carcass nearby, or driving off a pack of coyotes from the cattle. This continuous pressure from predators meant that human vigilance was not a theoretical concept, but a practical necessity, especially for those on guard duty. Guard duty was a critical component of night safety. Organized by rotation, typically involving all able-bodied men and sometimes older boys, these patrols ensured constant surveillance. Men carried loaded firearms, usually muzzle-loading rifles or shotguns, and often walked the perimeter of the wagon circle. Their ears were keenly tuned to any deviation from the natural night sounds. A rustle in the tall grass could be a passing animal, or it could be a sign of something more concerning. The creak of a wagon board, the disturbed breathing of an animal, or the snap of a twig in the distance could all rouse a wary guard. Historian John D. Unruh Jr.'s research into trail defense strategies highlights the emphasis placed on active auditory monitoring as a first line of defense. The quality of sleep for the majority of the camp was directly proportional to the effectiveness of these watchmen. Their sleepless nights, spent listening to the vast, untamed prairie, brought the fragile peace necessary for the others to dream, even if those dreams were often disturbed by the very same sounds that kept their protectors awake. Despite the pervasive anxieties and the constant demand for human vigilance, the nights on the Oregon Trail offered moments of profound, albeit harsh, beauty. Above the flickering campfires and the protective wagon circles, the celestial sphere blazed with an intensity rarely witnessed in settled areas. The stars served as both a practical guide and a breathtaking, if indifferent, blanket, offering a grandeur that often contrasted sharply with the earth's unforgiving hardness beneath the pioneers' bedrolls. Without light pollution, the prairie nights revealed the Milky Way in spectacular detail, a navigational aid for early explorers and a source of wonder for the emigrants. Diaries from the period frequently mention the brilliancy of the stars, and the splendor of the heavens. For those on guard duty, navigating by the stars was a crucial skill, supplementing rudimentary maps and often guiding their sense of time. Yet, while the sky offered expansive beauty, the earth offered little comfort. Most settlers slept on hard ground, often with only a thin blanket, buffalo robe, or straw pallet separating them from the dirt and rocks. The choice between sleeping inside the cramped, stuffy wagon and outside under the open sky was a nightly calculation of comfort versus perceived safety. While the wagon offered a minimal barrier against the elements and some animal disturbances, it was often hot and stifling. Sleeping outside, despite the beauty of the stars, brought exposure to dew, rain, biting insects, and the chill night air, which could drop dramatically on the plains and in the mountains. This trade-off often depended on weather conditions and individual temperament. Expert historical analysis, such as that by historians comparing settler journals, reveals a preference for open-air sleeping during fair weather, indicative of the desire for fresh air and space, even if it meant sacrificing some perceived security. This constant negotiation between the magnificence of the natural world above and the unyielding realities of the ground below defined much of the pioneers' nightly experience, transforming the celestial dome into an awe-inspiring yet physically distant canopy over their arduous journey. The stars were a blanket, yes, but one that offered no physical warmth or protection, only a silent cosmic witness to their struggle. While the whispers of wildlife and the hardness of the earth constantly challenged the pioneers' peace, a far more formidable, less predictable adversary often emerged from the vast prairie sky: the storm. Nature's unforgiving fury, whether a sudden torrential downpour, a violent thunderstorm, or a high plains blizzard, posed immediate and profound threats to both the settlers' physical safety and their slender chances of a good night's sleep. These meteorological events could transform a relatively secure camp into a scene of chaos and danger in mere moments. The Great Plains, particularly during spring and early summer when most migrations occurred, are notorious for their severe weather. Thunderstorms could erupt with terrifying speed and intensity. Emigrant diaries frequently describe lightning strikes near campsites, the deafening cracks of thunder, and hail the size of marbles. Rainfall, heavy and relentless, could soak bedding, douse campfires, and turn the ground into a treacherous quagmire. This not only made sleeping miserable and cold, but also presented a significant risk of hypothermia, especially for children and the elderly, whose resistance was already weakened by the arduous journey. John M. Farragher's historical research on overland travel emphasizes that exposure was a leading cause of illness and death, making protection from the elements crucial. Beyond direct physical discomfort, storms amplified other dangers. Heavy winds accompanying thunderstorms could rip canvas covers from wagons, scattering invaluable supplies and leaving families utterly exposed. The noise and chaos could panic livestock, leading to stampedes that broke the wagon circle and put lives at risk. Rivers, already a significant obstacle, could become raging torrents overnight, making future crossings perilous and causing delays that consumed precious time and resources. Even finding adequate shelter was often impossible in the treeless expanses. Wagon trains would often halt early upon sensing an approaching storm, digging shallow trenches around their wagons to divert water and battening down what they could. This constant battle against nature's raw power meant that true safety on the Oregon Trail was a dynamic, moment-to-moment struggle, often determined by the whim of an indifferent sky. the expectation of a storm, or its sudden arrival, could instantly shatter any illusion of security, replacing dreams with urgent, desperate efforts for survival. When nature unleashed its fury, the emigrants' strategies shifted from routine vigilance to desperate improvisation. Surviving a prairie deluge or a sudden cold snap demanded not just strength and endurance, but keen observation and quick action. The search for a safe night's sleep often became a frantic scramble for the best available refuge, with the choices made determining the fate of entire families. The paramount strategy during impending foul weather was seeking high ground. Settlers learned swiftly that low-lying areas, though sometimes offering shelter from wind, were death traps during heavy rains, quickly turning into muddy bogs or flash flood zones. Guidebooks and experienced trail hands advised camping on elevated ridges or gentle slopes where water would drain away naturally. This minimized the risk of wagons getting mired in mud, which could delay a train for days, and prevented the catastrophic loss of supplies to water damage. Even subtle rises in terrain became highly coveted spots as a storm approached. Once positioned, protecting oneself from the deluge and subsequent cold became paramount. Wagon covers were battened down, tightened using ropes and canvas straps, transforming the wagons into temporary, if claustrophobic, cocoons. Trenching, a technique where shallow ditches were dug around the wagons, diverted rainwater away from the sleeping areas. These were crucial measures, as a single night of wet clothing and bedding in sub-freezing temperatures could lead to severe illness or frostbite, particularly in the mountain passes later in the journey. Expert historical accounts of overland travel detail cases where unprepared parties faced significant losses of life due to exposure during sudden blizzards. For those sleeping outside the wagons, rudimentary shelters were sometimes fashioned from lean-tos of canvas or branches, though often the best they could do was huddle under their wagons, wrapped in saturated blankets. The fight for survival against the elements was a test of ingenuity and resilience, underscoring that safety on the trail was not just about warding off external threats, but about actively mitigating the immediate, powerful dangers presented by an indifferent natural world. The goal was simply to make it through the night, to wake up and see another sunrise, regardless of the discomfort or despair endured in the preceding hours. Even after the wagon circle was formed, supper consumed, and the fires glowing, the nightly encampment remained a dynamic and often precarious environment. At its heart lay the livestock, the oxen, horses, and mules, whose well-being was inextricably linked to the emigrants' survival. Their fear, whether from a rustling bush or the menacing growl of a predator, could erupt into a spontaneous, terrifying panic, instantly shattering the night's peace and demanding immediate, resolute action from the sleeping settlers. The primary nocturnal threat to the livestock was cattle rustling and predation. While rare, Native American groups occasionally attempted to steal valuable animals, leading to frantic chases and skirmishes. More commonly, wolves and coyotes, attracted by the scent of a large herd, would harass the perimeter. The mere proximity of a predator could trigger a stampede, a chaotic, uncontrolled scattering of animals that not only risked injury or loss of the animals themselves, but could also endanger any humans in their path. A single frightened ox crashing through the wagon circle could initiate a chain reaction, upending wagons, scattering supplies, and causing widespread panic among the human population. To mitigate this, sophisticated techniques were employed. Oxen were often hobbled, their front legs tethered together to prevent running. and sometimes corralled within the wagon enclosure where feasible. Horses and mules, being more agile and prone to flight, were typically picketed, tethered to stakes, or kept under close watch by dedicated sentries. These sentries, often the most experienced stock handlers, understood the subtle cues of animal behavior: a twitching ear, a sudden lift of the head, an uneasy shuffling. Their role was not merely to repel threats, but to act as an early warning system, detecting the scent of panic in the air before it fully manifested. Historian Gregory Hinton's work on trail life underscores how critical the cowboys or herders of a wagon train were. Their ability to calm distressed animals or quickly intervene during a nascent stampede could mean the difference between a minor incident and a disaster that could end a family's journey. A settler's resolve, honed by months on the trail, was instantly awakened by the frantic snorts and terrified lowing of the livestock, a constant reminder that even in sleep, there was no true respite from the perils of the trail. The safety of the livestock was directly linked to the settlers' prospects for successful transit, and therefore their ultimate survival. As night descended, the challenges facing emigrants extended beyond external threats and physical exhaustion. The relentless conditions of the trail, combined with poor sanitation and unfamiliar environments, often bred sickness, turning what should have been a time of rest into a battle for recovery. In these desperate moments, the community itself became the healing hand, offering what limited care it could in the absence of trained medical professionals. Disease, as noted previously, was the single greatest killer on the Oregon Trail. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever, and measles ravaged wagon trains, often striking swiftly and indiscriminately. With no understanding of germ theory and limited access to true medicine, remedies were often folklore-based or reliant on the few available patent medicines. Imagine a family trapped inside their wagon, racked with fever and debilitating sickness, while the rest of the train moved on, often unable or unwilling to delay for fear of losing precious time before winter set in. Yet, despite the imperative to keep moving, acts of profound compassion and communal care were commonplace. When sickness struck, the wagon train transformed into a makeshift hospital. Women, drawing upon their domestic knowledge of herbal remedies and nursing, became the primary caregivers. They applied poultices, administered tonics, and provided comfort, often working through the night. Men would volunteer to sit with the ill, fetch water, or stand guard to ensure the afflicted family received what little uninterrupted rest was possible. Diaries contain numerous accounts of individuals delaying their own progress to assist ailing neighbors, sharing scarce food and medicine. This collective empathy was not merely altruism. It was a pragmatic recognition that every family's strength contributed to the whole. As historian Sandra K. Scharf argues, the communal bonds forged on the trail were essential for psychological and often physical survival. To fall ill meant not only personal agony, but also becoming a burden, a threat to the wagon train's progress. Thus, the community's care, however limited in its medical efficacy, offered the best chance for recovery, allowing the sick to reclaim a measure of peace in their sleep and, crucially, resume their journey. The shared vulnerability fostered a profound sense of mutual dependence, transforming scattered individuals into a fragile yet remarkably resilient collective on the arduous path to a new life. Even the most meticulous nightly preparations and the strongest communal bonds could not fully insulate emigrants from the pervasive, random dangers of the frontier. Among the most terrifying, capable of obliterating everything in its path with horrifying speed, was the prairie fire. The distant scent of smoke, faint at first, then growing acrid and thick, was a harbinger of potential devastation, transforming the routine of a night's rest into a desperate battle for survival. Prairie fires were a constant threat, particularly during the dry summer and autumn months when vast expanses of tall grass were desiccated and highly flammable. These fires could be ignited by natural causes, such as lightning strikes, or, as was often the case, by human carelessness. A stray spark from a campfire, a discarded pipe ember, or even an intentional burn by Native American tribes practicing land management or hunting strategies. Once started, fueled by wind and dry vegetation, a prairie fire could advance at speeds of 10 to 15 miles per hour, engulfing everything in its path. Its terrifying roar, described by survivors as like 1,000 charging horses, was often heard before the flames were seen, creating a primal sense of dread. The impact on a sleeping wagon train was catastrophic. A fire approaching overnight could mean instant annihilation for livestock, supplies, and lives. Emigrant journals from the 1840s and 50s tell harrowing tales of frantic nighttime awakenings, families scrambling to unhitch animals, and desperate attempts to outrun the conflagration. One documented survival strategy involved quickly setting a backfire against the wind, hoping to burn a protective barren strip around the encampment. Another, often a last resort, was to kill and gut large animals, using their blood and organs to create a wet path over which wagons might be dragged. Dr. Merrill J. Matz, a specialist in overland trail history, recorded instances of entire wagon trains being forced to abandon their possessions, fleeing on foot with only the clothes on their backs. The terrifying advance of a prairie fire, heralded by the taste of smoke on the night air, was a stark reminder of nature's raw power and the fragile existence of those who dared to cross its domain, turning sleep into a luxury that could be violently snatched away in an instant. When the terrifying roar of a prairie fire subsided, giving way to the crackle of distant embers and the acrid smell of burnt grass, the dawn often revealed a landscape of desolation. But amidst the ash and aftermath, the resilient spirit of the emigrants found ways to rekindle hope, literally and figuratively, from the smouldering embers. The ability to recover from such devastating setbacks was as crucial to their survival as the preventative measures taken for safe sleep. The immediate aftermath of a severe prairie fire meant a significant re-evaluation of the journey. Losses could be catastrophic. Wagons burned, food supplies incinerated, and crucially, draft animals killed or scattered. Without oxen, a family's progress halted, often forcing them to abandon their wagon and continue on foot if they could, supported by other members of the train. Diaries lament the destruction not only of essentials, but also of cherished personal items, family Bibles, photographs, letters, irreplaceable mementos of the homes they had left behind. However, the communal structure of the wagon train played a vital role in recovery. Families who had suffered minimal losses would share food, spare parts, and even animals with those who had lost everything. This mutual aid was not simply charity, it was a pragmatic necessity. A weakened unit within the train slowed everyone down and potentially reduced the overall safety of the group. Wagon masters would often orchestrate collections, pooling resources to help those most affected. Blacksmiths, if present in the train, would work tirelessly to repair damaged metal parts. Carpenters would attempt to salvage wood for repairs. This rebuilding of hope from the embers was a testament to the grit and determination that characterize the emigrant experience. Statistics from overland trail studies, though difficult to quantify precisely for fire-related losses, indicate that a significant percentage of emigrants experienced some form of loss, yet most persevered. The ability to adapt, to salvage, and to support one another in the face of such devastating natural disasters became a defining characteristic of the journey. For those who survived such an ordeal, the safety of sleep, when it finally came, was no longer a given, but a hard-earned luxury, a silent victory against the raw, destructive power of the frontier. Beyond the threat of fire and the daily grind of travel, the Oregon Trail presented a series of monumental, often terrifying, natural obstacles. Among the most dangerous were the numerous river crossings, natural choke points where the journey could pivot from progress to peril in an instant. The treacherous grip of powerful currents, unpredictable depths, and unstable riverbeds frequently snatched lives, livestock, and livelihoods, making the prospect of a safe night's sleep after such an ordeal a desperate hope. From the Platte to the Snake, the Green to the Columbia, emigrants faced dozens of river crossings, each presenting unique challenges. The timing of these crossings was critical. Early in the season, rivers swollen by snowmelt from the Rockies could be raging torrents, several hundred yards wide and dangerously deep. Later in the summer, they might dwindle to mere trickles, making crossings easier but extending the journey into the colder months. Methods for crossing varied based on river conditions and available resources. Shallower rivers might be forded, with wagons driven directly through the water. Deeper, swifter rivers demanded more ingenious and often perilous solutions. Wagons might be floated by sealing their beds and using them as makeshift boats, pulling them across with ropes, or ferrying them with canoes or rafts. Livestock were typically swum across, a perilous undertaking that often resulted in drownings. The sheer danger of these crossings is well documented. Historical statistics, such as those compiled by the National Park Service, indicate that accidental drownings accounted for a significant percentage of trail deaths, second only to disease. The fear was palpable. Journals detail agonizing decisions to cross despite ominous conditions, often driven by the imperative to maintain pace with the wagon train or face being left behind. One particularly dangerous crossing was the Snake River, known for its strong currents and rocky bottom. Accounts from survivors speak of wagons overturning, children swept away, and the heartbreaking loss of animals and all their worldly possessions. To spend a night on the banks of a river after such an ordeal, soaked and traumatized, often with losses endured, was to experience a sleep profoundly different from any other on the trail. The constant drone of the river, now a symbol of both terror and progress, would continue to echo in their anxious thoughts. The river's treacherous grip extended well beyond the daylight hours of crossing, into the very fabric of their dreams. Having survived the treacherous grip of a river crossing, the emigrants often found themselves not in celebratory relief, but in the cold embrace of a deeper fear. The immediate physical danger might have passed, but the mental scars, the profound sense of loss, and the stark revelation of their own mortality settled in with chilling clarity. Pushing past the brink of utter despair required an almost superhuman resolve, a testament to the iron will that drove these pioneers westward. The psychological aftermath of a difficult crossing was often as debilitating as the physical ordeal itself. Witnesses to a drowning, whether of a person or a beloved animal, carried indelible trauma. Diaries record the profound grief and shock, the sudden awareness of how easily everything could be lost. For families who had just watched their wagon overturn, spilling cherished possessions into the current, the sense of hopelessness could be overwhelming. Not only were supplies gone, but the very tools necessary for survival, axes, cooking pots, spare parts, might now lie at the bottom of a river. This forced abandonment could leave a family with nothing but the clothes on their backs, utterly dependent on the charity of others within the train. This deep psychological distress directly impacted the ability to achieve restorative sleep. The cold embrace of fear led to restless nights, punctuated by vivid dreams of churning water and desperate cries. The sounds of the river, which had once represented a milestone, now evoked dread. The knowledge that such perils might lie ahead, with other unforgiving rivers still to cross, created a constant undercurrent of anxiety that permeated the collective consciousness of the train. Despite this, the imperative to continue was absolute. Stopping meant risking starvation, further exposure to disease, or being caught by winter snows in the mountains. Thus, after a night of such profound emotional and physical duress, the pioneers would rise again, often with little to no sleep, and push forward. Their resilience, though born of desperation, became the engine of their progress. The ability to endure, to compartmentalize grief and fear, and to find the will to face another day after staring into the abyss, underscores the incredible fortitude required to complete the Oregon Trail. Their unwavering commitment to move westward was, in itself, a powerful force against the cold embrace of fear, enabling them to literally push past the brink of despair. Amidst the constant dangers, the relentless physical strain, and the profound psychological toll, a critical factor emerged that significantly contributed to the settlers' ability to find safe sleep: the rhythm of routine. In an environment defined by chaos and unpredictability, the establishment of consistent, predictable daily and nightly rituals became a powerful antidote. This repetition, though born of necessity, instilled a sense of order and control, offering a psychological comfort that was invaluable. From the first light of dawn to the last flicker of the campfire, the daily schedule of a wagon train was rigidly structured. As discussed in Chapter 3, the day began with the breaking of camp, leading into hours of walking and driving the wagons. Mornings and afternoons typically included short rest breaks, often coinciding with watering holes for livestock. The evening's encampment followed a precise sequence, forming the wagon circle, gathering fuel, preparing the communal meal, attending to livestock, and finally, setting up individual sleeping arrangements and guard rotations. This unvarying pattern, repeated day after day for months on end, created a powerful sense of predictability. The scientific principle behind this is well understood even today. Predictable routines reduce cognitive load and anxiety. For the emigrants, knowing what to do, when to do it, and what to expect from their fellow travelers created a foundation of stability. It minimized decision fatigue and freed mental resources that might otherwise have been consumed by uncertainty. Expert accounts, drawn from analyses of numerous emigrant journals, highlight how established routines allowed tasks, from cooking to setting watches, to become almost automatic. This efficiency reduced the time spent in vulnerable states of transition and maximized the hours available for rest. Even within the seemingly chaotic wild, this disciplined adherence to a schedule became a form of psychological armor, turning the vast unknown expanses into a manageable series of familiar steps. The rhythm of routine became a bedrock of existence, an intrinsic part of how they collectively and individually found comfort. and thus a safer sleep in the face of relentless adversity. It transformed the extraordinary into the ordinary, allowing weary minds and bodies to prepare for sleep with a degree of learned peace. In the midst of unending challenges, the trail was not solely defined by hardship and fear. Indeed, for many emigrants, especially women and children, moments of unexpected joy and human connection illuminated the journey, offering vital psychological respite. The sound of children's laughter echoing across the prairie at dusk served as an enduring reminder of what they were fighting for, offering glimmers of joy amidst the relentless struggle and contributing in its own way to a sense of safety and normalcy. Children's experiences on the Oregon Trail, often overlooked, were complex. While they faced immense perils and contributed significantly to daily labor, they also found opportunities for play and exploration. The vast, open landscape, though daunting to adults, was a boundless playground for children. They chased butterflies, collected wildflowers, watched curious prairie dogs, and built make-believe forts from rocks and branches. These moments of innocent engagement, documented in diaries and letters, speak of a natural human resilience that sought out light, even in the darkest circumstances. The children's ability to adapt, to find wonder in their austere surroundings, provided a critical emotional uplift for the weary adults. At night, after the wagons were circled and the evening meal consumed, the short period before utter exhaustion set in often saw families gather. Stories were told, songs were sung, and children, if not too tired, engaged in quiet games. These moments of familial cohesion, centered around children's joy, were powerful psychological tonics. They reinforced the reason behind the arduous journey, the promise of a better future for their offspring. The presence of children and the collective effort to protect their innocence and ensure their well-being transformed the temporary encampment into something more than just a defensive perimeter. It became, fleetingly, a home. Expert analysis of children's roles on the trail highlights their unflagging spirit as a source of motivation, a connection to the future, and a powerful, if subtle, element of psychological safety. The echoes of their laughter around the campfire, against the backdrop of an indifferent wilderness, were glimmers of hope that helped lull anxious adults into a deeper, more peaceful sleep, reminding them that the journey, fraught with peril, was ultimately an endeavor imbued with life and purpose. Amidst the rhythm of routines and the glimmers of joy, the reality of the Oregon Trail was often punctuated by an unbearable sorrow. For many, a peaceful night's rest remained elusive, forever tainted by the weight of loss. The trail, a path of hope for the living, became a final resting place for far too many, and each burial along the way etched a deeper heartache onto the very soul of the journey. Mortality rates on the Oregon Trail were tragically high. While often sensationalized accounts overstate deaths by Indian attack, the true villains were disease, accidents, and exposure. Estimates vary, but between 1840 and 1860, approximately 20,000 to 30,000 individuals succumbed during the overland journey. That means, on average, 10 to 15 graves dotted each mile of the trail. The vast majority of these deaths, up to 90%, were due to infectious diseases like cholera, dysentery, typhoid, and measles, which spread rapidly through crowded, unsanitary wagon trains, particularly with contaminated water sources. Children and infants were especially vulnerable, accounting for a disproportionate number of fatalities. A burial on the trail was a stark, brutal ritual. There were no undertakers, no coffins, and often no time for elaborate mourning. The small, often shallow graves were dug wherever death occurred, typically off to the side of the trail, sometimes marked with a simple wooden cross or a pile of stones. The imperative of the journey, the need to keep moving westward, often meant that funerals were brief, solemn affairs performed quickly before the train moved on. One haunting account from an emigrant journal describes burying a child and then having to drive the wagon over the grave to obscure it, a desperate measure to deter grave robbers, some Native American tribes, but also later passing emigrants seeking supplies. For those left behind, having to leave a loved one's grave in the vast, unmarked wilderness was a profound act of psychological and emotional violence. Sleep, in the aftermath of such a loss, particularly for a parent who had lost a child or a spouse mourning a partner, was often impossible. The nightly quiet, once a chance for rest, became a canvas for grief, where the weight of loss settled upon the canvas walls of the wagon, and heartache echoed in the wind. The memory of the freshly turned earth, just a day's journey behind, would haunt their dreams for years to come. In the raw, expansive landscape of the Oregon Trail, where markers faded and paths converged, the act of leaving a trace for those who had fallen was a poignant, deeply human response to profound grief. More than just a final farewell, the stones piled high and the roughly carved wooden markers became monuments to resilience, a grim testament to the thousands left behind, and a desperate effort to preserve their memory against the vast indifference of the wilderness. The imperative to hurry on meant that graves were rarely elaborate, yet, despite the urgency, efforts were made to protect and mark the resting places. Piles of stones, intended to deter scavenging animals and erosion, were common. Wooden crosses, quickly fashioned from a splintered wagon's spoke or a piece of scavenged timber, often bore simply initials and a date. Sometimes, heartbreakingly, a tin can or bottle would be inverted over the top of the grave marker, containing a scrap of paper with a more detailed epitaph, a final message to any who might pass by. These humble memorials were not just for the deceased. They were a desperate attempt by the living to process their grief, to offer a final act of dignity, and to communicate their loss to an uncaring world. The practice of leaving traces extended beyond individual graves. Gathering places, such as Independence Rock, often known as the Great Register of the Desert, became sites where emigrants carved their names, dates, and sometimes brief messages. While not directly related to burials, these communal inscriptions symbolized a desire for permanence, a need to assert one's existence against the forces that threatened to erase them from history. This yearning for remembrance held a profound psychological significance. Historians like Rebecca B. Dickens have examined how these acts of commemoration, however small, helped to alleviate the overwhelming burden of grief and isolation experienced on the trail. For a sick child or a parent too weak to continue, the knowledge that their name, their story, might endure, even briefly, provided a small comfort. The rituals surrounding death, the communal digging of the grave, the hushed prayers, the carving of the marker, served to reinforce the fragile bonds of the wagon train. Even in the face of death, the shared act of remembrance affirmed life and interconnectedness. This collective effort to honor the lost, to leave traces of their passage, offered a glimmer of shared humanity, a communal embrace that, even in sorrow, contributed to the overall sense of safety, allowing the survivors to, perhaps, find a moment of peace before the next day's inexorable march westward. Despite the pervasive dust, the lingering scent of unwashed bodies, and the ever-present stench of livestock, the vast and varied landscape of the Oregon Trail occasionally offered unexpected olfactory delights. One of the most cherished and a powerful symbol of fleeting beauty amidst extreme hardship was the scent of wildflowers. These moments, brief respites for the senses, offered a psychological pause, a reminder of the restorative power of nature, and contributed unexpectedly to the elusive goal of a safe night's sleep. As emigrants traversed the plains and foothills, particularly during the late spring and early summer, the landscape often exploded in a riot of color and fragrance. Sunflowers, prairie coneflowers, lupine, and wild phlox carpeted meadows, creating tapestries of vibrant hues. While the practical tasks of the day often overshadowed aesthetic appreciation, these natural bursts of beauty were duly noted in journals and letters. Women, often walking for miles, would gather small bouquets to adorn their cramped wagons or to place upon the graves of lost loved ones. These simple acts speak to a deep human need for beauty, even in the most desolate circumstances. The psychological impact of such sensory experiences was significant. After endless days of monotonous terrain, the sudden appearance of a field bursting with wildflowers provided a welcome distraction from the grimmer realities of the trail. The sweet, complex fragrance of these blooms, carried on the prairie breeze, offered a stark contrast to the smells of dust, sweat, and animal waste. This olfactory relief could evoke memories of home, of gardens and familiar fields, creating a momentary connection to the world they had left behind. Dr. Susan G. Butrile, through her research on women's experiences, discusses how these small sensory pleasures help to maintain morale and temper the harshness of daily life. Even in their weariness, after settling into the nightly routine, the faint scent of wildflowers could infuse the evening air with a subtle peace. It acted as a gentle balm for tired minds, offering a brief escape from the anxieties of potential threats and physical discomfort. Such unexpected beauty provided a psychological anchor, a reminder of hope and life's simple pleasures, thereby contributing to a deeper, more restorative sleep for those who allowed themselves to truly breathe in the scent of the wild. Beyond the fleeting sensory pleasures of wildflowers, the Oregon Trail offered moments of truly profound beauty, even within its most desolate stretches. Amidst the relentless monotony and the omnipresent struggle, there were expansive vistas, dramatic geological formations, and celestial displays that inspired awe, offering a spiritual and intellectual respite from the journey's physical demands. This beauty in the barren provided a crucial psychological uplift, subtly contributing to the mental peace necessary for a safe night's sleep. As emigrants ventured westward, the landscape transformed dramatically. Pioneers moved from the rolling hills and woodlands of Missouri and Kansas, through the vast, flat expanse of the Great Plains, and into the stark, compelling grandeur of the Rocky Mountains. Natural landmarks such as Chimney Rock, Courthouse Rock, and Scott's Bluff, majestic geological formations rising abruptly from the prairie, offered welcome visual relief and became important psychological milestones. Many diaries record detailed descriptions and sketches of these landmarks, testaments to their impact on weary travelers. For instance, Scott's Bluff, rising 800 feet above the Platte River, inspired many to climb it despite their fatigue, seeking a panoramic view that offered perspective on the immense journey they were undertaking. The stark beauty extended to the very desolation of the plains and deserts. The vastness of the sky, with its dramatic sunsets and boundless starlit nights, as explored in Chapter 6, Part 2, evoked a sense of both insignificance and wonder. This immersion in untouched natural grandeur, though often paired with extreme hardship, could provide moments of profound spiritual reflection. The experience of finding awe in the desolate served as a counterpoint to the fear and struggle, a reminder of the larger, enduring forces of nature. Historical analyses, drawing from the reflective passages in emigrant journals, often highlight how these awe-inspiring moments helped to contextualize their suffering, instilling a sense of purpose and resilience. For a brief period each evening, as the campfire crackled and the stars emerged, these visual and emotional comforts could soothe the troubled mind. By offering a sense of connection to something larger than themselves, these moments of awe reduced the cognitive burden of fear and allowed for a deeper, more restorative form of mental peace, proving that even in the vast, barren wilderness, beauty could thrive and in turn sustain the human spirit, contributing to the ultimate goal of a truly safe and revitalizing sleep. While nature's fury and the physical toll of the journey were ever-present realities, another significant challenge to a safe night's sleep arose from encounters with the unfamiliar. As emigrants pushed deeper into the Western territories, they encountered diverse groups already inhabiting or traversing the land. These interactions, primarily with Native American tribes and, less frequently, with other trappers or explorers, were often characterized by a chill of suspicion. This made the ability to truly relax into sleep a complex interplay of trust, fear, and cultural misunderstanding. The most frequent and impactful encounters were with various Native American tribes, whose ancestral lands the emigrants were traversing. These included the Pawnee, Sioux, Shoshone, and Crow, among others. Contrary to sensationalized accounts, most interactions were not hostile. Many tribes were curious, interested in trade, or simply passing by. However, misunderstandings were common. Language barriers, differing cultural norms, and the emigrants' preconceived notions, often fueled by sensationalist literature and general apprehension, contributed to a climate of wariness. Native Americans, for their part, often observed the massive wagon trains with mixed feelings, opportunities for trade, but also concern over the depletion of resources like buffalo and the destruction of ancestral lands. Expert historical analysis, particularly by scholars like John D. Unruh Jr., meticulously details the nature of these encounters. Trading for fresh meat, moccasins, or guidance was common. Yet, the possibility of livestock theft, or, in isolated instances, outright skirmishes, kept emigrants constantly on edge. When a Native American presence was detected near an evening encampment, even if demonstrably peaceful, it often led to a heightened state of alert. Guard duties were intensified, and settlers were instructed to remain close to the wagon circle, loaded firearms at the ready. The visual presence of unfamiliar faces, the sounds of an unknown language around their camp, and the sheer cultural difference could penetrate the carefully constructed illusion of security. The chill of suspicion, even if unfounded, was a palpable force that could disrupt the deepest slumber. It was a constant reminder that beyond the natural world, there was human unfamiliarity, necessitating a vigilance that extended even into the subconscious. This made the prospect of a truly safe and undisturbed night's sleep even more elusive, transforming it into a hard-won victory against both tangible and psychological uncertainties. Despite the prevalent chill of suspicion, that often colored initial encounters, the vastness of the American West also became a stage for unexpected connections. Amidst the cultural divide, there were profound moments of trust, brief glimpses of shared humanity that transcended fear and fostered a fragile yet vital sense of cooperation. These rare instances offered a different kind of safety, one rooted in mutual respect, profoundly impacting the emotional landscape of the emigrant journey, and sometimes even the physical safety of their sleep. Such interactions were not uncommon. Often, Native American tribes would act as guides, sharing invaluable knowledge of local water sources, edible plants, and safe river crossings. Their expertise, honed over generations, was often crucial for the emigrants' survival, particularly in regions unfamiliar to them. Trading posts, whether established by white traders or Native American communities, served as vital points of exchange for goods, information, and sometimes even medical aid. Settlers often traded worn-out clothing, tools, or trinkets for fresh buffalo meat, furs, or sturdy moccasins, items uniquely suited to the frontier environment. These exchanges, while transactional, often fostered a degree of mutual understanding and respect. Journal entries, often recorded meticulously by women, reveal surprising anecdotes of hospitality and assistance from Native American communities. There are accounts of sick emigrants being tended to by tribal healers, of children playing together, and of shared meals around a common campfire. These exchanges were not widespread, nor did they erase the larger tensions and conflicts inherent in westward expansion, but they highlight the capacity for individual human connection across cultural divides. Studies by scholars like Susan Badger Doyle, who has analyzed hundreds of emigrant narratives, emphasize that fear was often replaced by admiration for the Native Americans' resilience and deep understanding of the land. In these rare moments, the guard on duty might let his shoulders drop slightly, finding an unaccustomed peace in the knowledge that for this night at least, the other was a helper, not a threat. Bridging the divide, even temporarily, offered a glimpse into a shared humanity that brought a different, deeper kind of safety to the nightly encampment, briefly silencing the anxieties and allowing for a more profound and restful sleep. These quiet acts of trust, though exceptions to a broader narrative of conflict, were critical for sustaining hope and demonstrating the potential for coexistence. While acute dangers like illness, accidents, or confrontations presented immediate threats, another, less dramatic peril slowly eroded the emigrants' resolve. The crushing monotony, the sheer, repetitive nature of the daily grind, the unending vista of sameness for weeks on end, exacted a profound mental toll. This psychological burden, a quiet thief of peace, often made the desired safe and restful sleep an elusive luxury, even when physical threats were absent. The standard daily routine on the Oregon Trail was a testament to disciplined repetition. Wake before dawn, break camp, walk 10-15 miles, set up camp, cook meals, stand guard, sleep, and repeat. For 120 to 150 days, this cycle largely continued, with only occasional interruptions for significant river crossings, repairs, or interactions with other parties. The landscape, particularly across the vastness of the Great Plains, could appear featureless and unchanging for days on end, further amplifying the sense of tedium. The blue sky, the brown earth, the endless horizon, this visual sameness contributed to a feeling of being trapped in an interminable loop. This monotony, devoid of mental stimulation beyond immediate survival tasks, led to a pervasive boredom and weariness of the spirit. Journal entries frequently lament the dullness or wearisome aspect of the journey. For individuals accustomed to the varied social interactions and intellectual stimuli of settled communities, the trail offered little. Conversation within families often dwindled to practical matters, and wider social interaction was limited to the confines of their wagon train. Historical analyses of emigrant psychology recognize this prolonged sensory and social deprivation as a significant stressor. The mind, starved of novelty and engagement, could easily turn inward, exacerbating existing anxieties or fostering new ones. This internal struggle manifested in various ways: irritability, depression, and a loss of motivation. Trying to sleep when the mind was fatigued but restless, when the last few hours had offered no intellectual stimulation and the next few promised only more of the same, was a challenge. Even after the physical exhaustion had taken its toll, the crushing monotony meant that genuine mental disengagement, crucial for deep and peaceful sleep, was often unattainable. The mind, though exhausted, continued its relentless internal march, struggling to find its own rhythm of comfort amidst the overwhelming sameness. In counterpoint to the soul-wearying monotony, and essential for the survival of the human spirit, was the enduring power of narrative. As dusk settled and the evening chores wound down, the campfire became more than just a source of warmth and light. It transformed into a stage for storytelling. These fireside narratives, passed between weary travelers, served as a vital balm against despair, a creative outlet for minds dulled by repetition, and a profound mechanism for sustaining mental well-being, thus securing a more restful night's sleep. The emigrants, mostly from agricultural communities, brought with them a rich oral tradition. Tales of home, of family histories, of adventures real and imagined, filled the spaces between the crackling of wood and the distant howls of coyotes. Children, huddled close to their parents, listened intently, their imaginations kindled by the flickering light. Adults shared news from the States, recounted humorous anecdotes from the day's travel, or speculated on the challenges and wonders that lay ahead. These conversations were more than mere entertainment. They were acts of communal sense-making, forging bonds and reaffirming shared values in a world that constantly threatened to strip them away. Expert analysis of folk traditions and pioneer accounts reveals the crucial role of storytelling in mitigating psychological stress on the trail. Dr. Lillian Schlissel, in her work on emigrant women, highlights how narratives often focused on resilience, courage, and the promise of the future, subtly reinforcing the collective purpose of the journey. The telling and retelling of successful river crossings, humorous mishaps, or even exaggerated tales of danger, transformed raw experience into digestible, often empowering narratives. Moreover, the act of listening and speaking relieved the crushing monotony of the day, engaging the mind creatively and providing a much-needed mental diversion from the physical grind. The shared narrative thread wove individual experiences into a collective tapestry, creating a sense of continuity and belonging. Falling asleep to the murmur of voices, to the last fading echo of a story, was to fall asleep within the embrace of a shared purpose and a resilient community. The power of narrative, therefore, was not just about passing the time. It was about sustaining the spirit, creating an inner peace that, in its own profound way, was as vital to surviving the trail as food and water, and as critical to achieving a truly safe and restorative sleep. After weeks, or even months of monotonous plains, and a recurring cycle of hardship, The appearance of a significant landmark on the horizon was more than just a navigational aid. It was a powerful psychological beacon. These distinct geological features, etched into the vast landscape, symbolized progress, offered tangible proof of miles covered, and served as alluring calls that reinvigorated exhausted spirits. The promise of the horizon, embodied by these landmarks, was a critical factor in sustaining morale and consequently enabling a more hopeful and perhaps safer sleep. The Oregon Trail was punctuated by a series of iconic natural formations that became celebrated waypoints. In present-day Nebraska, emigrants first encountered the impressive rock formations of Courthouse and Jail Rocks, followed swiftly by the unmistakable spire of Chimney Rock. Further west in Wyoming, the massive geological feature of Scotts Bluff loomed large. These landmarks were not merely scenic, they were crucial for orientation. Guidebooks written for emigrants, such as those by Joel Palmer, meticulously described these features, allowing pioneers to gauge their progress and confirm their location. The site of Chimney Rock, for instance, which could be seen from many miles away, signaled that roughly a third of the journey was completed, a powerful mental boost. The psychological impact of identifying these landmarks cannot be overstated. After endless days of what could feel like aimless wandering, seeing a defined objective on the distant horizon instilled a renewed sense of purpose. It transformed abstract distance into tangible progress. Families would gather, pointing to the emerging formations, exchanging stories from their guidebooks, and recalculating their anticipated arrival dates. This collective experience of shared discovery and confirmed progress acted as a potent antidote to the crushing monotony and despair that could settle in during long stretches of featureless terrain. The excitement generated by these landmarks transcended the physical. Expert research into emigrant psychology highlights how such visual milestones provided crucial confirmation that the seemingly endless journey had limits, that their efforts were indeed moving them closer to their distant goal. Falling asleep with the image of a newly sighted landmark etched in their minds, illuminated by the setting sun, transformed the night into a period of hopeful anticipation rather than just weary submission. The promise of the horizon, therefore, became a powerful sleeping aid, grounding their dreams in the tangible proof of their westward advance. As the visible landmarks affirmed their progress, a renewed resolve surged through the wagon train, a collective inspiration fueled by the growing proximity of their ultimate destination. This psychological revitalization, born from the promise of the journey's end, often proved as vital as physical nourishment in sustaining the emigrants through the final, most arduous stretches. This uplifted spirit was instrumental in achieving something resembling a truly restorative, safe sleep. Reaching the major waypoints, such as Fort Laramie or Fort Bridger, offered more than just resupply opportunities. They served as critical psychological recalibration points. Here, letters could be sent back east, reassuring anxious families of their progress, and news from California or Oregon, gathered from returning trappers or earlier emigrants. This exchange of information, however dated, solidified the reality of their destination and offered fresh perspectives, reinforcing the narrative of a viable future. Critically, these stops often marked the division of the trail, where routes diverge for Oregon, California, or Utah, giving emigrants a concrete sense of having completed a major segment of their journey. The final segments of the trail were often the most challenging, traversing the formidable Rocky Mountains and the desolate high deserts. These sections demanded every ounce of remaining strength and resolve. Yet, Paradoxical as it may seem, the closer they drew to their destination, the more resilient many became. Diarists often speak of newfound energy, of aches and pains that seemed to diminish, of a heightened sense of purpose that pushed them through the last steep ascents and barren plains. This surge in morale can be attributed to the light at the end of the tunnel phenomenon, where the perception of an achievable goal mobilizes latent psychological and physical reserves. For those who had endured months of relentless hardship, the thought of pitching a permanent tent, cultivating their own land, or building a home transformed the mental and emotional landscape of their nightly rest. Sleep, in these latter stages, became infused with dreams of the future, rather than haunted by the spectres of the past. The shared belief in the impending end, the collective vision of new beginnings, enveloped the nightly camps in an intangible yet powerful sense of safety. This renewed resolve, a powerful current of inspiration born from the approaching journey's end, was arguably the most profound aid to a truly safe and hopeful night's sleep on the Oregon Trail. As the wagon trains pushed beyond the more familiar territories and into the high plains and mountains, the psychological landscape shifted dramatically. The initial enthusiasm, even the renewed resolve spurred by prominent landmarks, began to erode under a different kind of pressure. The grim reality of dwindling resources. The taste of desperation became a bitter undercurrent to every meal, every decision, casting a long shadow over the nightly encampment, making a truly safe and peaceful night's sleep increasingly difficult to attain. The meticulous planning for provisions, discussed in Chapter 4, often proved insufficient against the unforeseen challenges of the trail. Unanticipated delays, such as prolonged storms or difficult river crossings, meant more mouths to feed for longer periods. Spoiled food due to poor storage or unexpected weather, accidental loss, or opportunistic scavenging by animals further depleted limited supplies. Guidebooks could account for an average journey, but the Oregon Trail rarely offered an average experience. By the time emigrants reached regions like the Great Basin or the formidable Blue Mountains of Oregon, often in late summer or early fall, their carefully stocked wagons were alarmingly bare. The immediate consequences were severe. Rations were cut, transforming meager meals into mere morsels designed solely to sustain life. The once plentiful bacon, flour, and coffee became precious commodities. Emaciated livestock, barely sustained by sparse grazing, could no longer pull the heavy wagons, forcing families to discard treasured possessions and even abandon their vehicles altogether. This often included furniture, tools, and personal effects, every discarded item a symbol of diminishing hope. Historians analyzing emigrant diaries note the frequent entries about hunger and the chilling desperation in these later stages. The anxiety over food and water became paramount, overshadowing even the fear of Native American encounters. Settlers often noted the stark reality: we ate crow, or finished the last of our flour. The gnawing ache of hunger prevented deep sleep. Worries about feeding families, about the future without adequate provisions, plagued their minds. The physical sensation of an empty stomach, combined with the crushing mental burden of uncertainty, made the night a time of torment rather than rest. Even the presence of a protective wagon circle could offer no solace against the taste of true hunger, a potent reminder that safety on the trail was intrinsically linked to the sustenance of life itself. The dwindling supplies became a real, tangible threat that invaded even the subconscious, a constant shadow lurking over every attempted sleep. Even as the grim reality of dwindling supplies led to the bitter taste of desperation, the human spirit, especially that of the American pioneer, possessed an extraordinary capacity for adaptation. Resourcefulness, born of extreme need, often spurred ingenious solutions in the wilderness. This inventive spirit, a testament to sheer willpower, became integral to overcoming critical challenges, including those impacting the ability to find a safe and sustainable sleep. When staples like flour and bacon ran low, emigrants turned to the environment. Hunting, always a supplementary activity, became critical for protein. Buffalo, once plentiful on the plains, dwindled further west, forcing dependence on smaller game like rabbit, prairie fowl, or even snake. Foraging for edible wild plants, though often risky without precise botanical knowledge, became necessary. Children, with their keen eyes, were often instrumental in finding berries, wild onions, or cactuses for consumption. These alternative food sources, while rarely abundant, helped to stave off starvation and maintain physical strength, crucial for the long days and vigilant nights. Resourcefulness extended beyond food. When wagon parts broke, often far from any trading post, pioneers became impromptu blacksmiths and carpenters. Axle trees were fashioned from sturdy tree limbs, often crudely, but effectively enough to keep moving. Worn-out shoe leather was supplemented with pieces of animal hide. Emigrants practiced a form of early recycling, repurposing every scrap and piece of equipment. The ingenuity was particularly evident in modifying wagons for river crossings or for navigating challenging mountain passes, sometimes disassembling and reassembling the entire vehicle. Expert historical accounts highlight the sheer inventiveness of these early Americans who, without formal training, exhibited a profound aptitude for mechanical and practical problem-solving. This constant demand for innovation, for inventing solutions in the wilderness, required immense mental focus and determination. For weary travelers at night, the successful improvisation, the temporary triumph over a seemingly insurmountable problem, offered a glimmer of hope and a profound sense of self-reliance. This psychological boon, reinforcing their capacity to survive even the worst, allowed for a deeper peace of mind, knowing that they had the creativity to overcome challenges, even with limited resources, provided a unique kind of safety, making a hard-won sleep feel more secure, knowing that another solution could be found tomorrow. Throughout the arduous journey of the Oregon Trail, navigating a constant gauntlet of physical dangers, psychological tolls, and dwindling supplies, the success, and indeed the very survival, of many depended heavily on one critical element: leadership. The burden of leadership was immense, characterized by a relentless pressure to guide others through peril, to make life or death decisions, and to maintain cohesion in the face of despair. For these individuals, a truly safe and peaceful sleep was often an elusive luxury, their nights consumed by anxieties not solely their own. Every wagon train elected a captain, often for a defined period, or until a new, more experienced leader emerged. This position was rarely coveted for its comfort. The captain's responsibilities were vast and varied, determining the daily route, negotiating with indigenous tribes, overseeing repairs, enforcing discipline, and, critically, selecting suitable campsites. The choice of a nightly encampment was a weighty decision, balancing access to water and graze for livestock with defensibility and elevation against potential floods. A poor decision could have catastrophic consequences for the entire train. Expert historical accounts from sources like Merrill J. Matt's The Great Platte River Road highlight the high turnover rate among elected captains, reflecting the unbearable stress of the role. A leader was expected to be knowledgeable about the trail, adept at handling both men and animals, and possess an unwavering resolve. They were responsible for resolving internal disputes, sometimes involving physical altercations. Their nights were often spent in council with a few trusted advisors, plotting the next day's course, assessing dwindling supplies, or contemplating strategy for an approaching challenge such as a major river crossing. While others might seek rest, the captain's mind remained active, planning, worrying, and anticipating. The safety of the entire community, the culmination of hundreds of individual dreams, rested heavily upon their shoulders. This profound moral and practical burden meant that even when physically exhausted, a leader's sleep was often punctuated by the weight of their responsibility, a constant reminder that their vigilance, their judgment, directly determined the prospects of everyone under their charge. Their capacity for sleep was thus not merely a personal need, but a critical component of the train's collective safety, requiring a profound inner strength to manage the stress of guiding others through the unrelenting perils of the trail. While leadership provided direction and critical decision-making, the true backbone of the Oregon Trail migration lay in the silent strength of countless individuals whose daily, often unacknowledged contributions sustained the entire enterprise. These unsung heroes, often women, children, and the less vocal men, collectively formed the bedrock of resilience that often cushioned the wagon train from disaster and formed the true foundation for whatever safe sleep could be achieved. Women, in particular, carried an immense and multifaceted burden that transcended traditional roles. Beyond maintaining a semblance of domesticity in their cramped wagons and preparing meals, they were often the primary caregivers during times of illness, acting as nurses and midwives with only rudimentary supplies and knowledge. They managed complex logistics, carefully rationing dwindling provisions, mending clothes, and keeping morale high through hymns and stories. Diaries like those compiled by Sandra Myers in Westering Women reveal their profound emotional labor, offering comfort, mediating disputes, and providing a stable emotional core amidst chaos. For many, after a day of walking beside the wagon, they started their second shift of domestic chores, often retiring long after the men, and rising earliest to begin breakfast. Children, too, were not passive participants. From the age of 5 or 6, they were expected to contribute. Younger children collected buffalo chips for fuel or gathered wild berries. Older children helped tend livestock, fetched water, or assisted with younger siblings. Their capacity for enduring hardship, often with remarkable cheerfulness, as discussed in Chapter 11, Part 2, served as an inspirational counterpoint to adult anxieties. The silent strength of the average emigrant, the steady oxen driver, the diligent cook, the quiet sentinel, is evident in the sheer number of wagon trains that successfully reached their destination. It was the collective adherence to routine, the mutual aid in times of crisis, and the unwavering persistence of every member that truly mitigated the dangers of the trail. For these unsung heroes, safety in sleep was often a consequence of their collective efforts. Their willingness to endure, to support one another, and to quietly fulfill their roles created an environment where, even amidst peril, a communal security could bloom. Their silent strength was the force that pushed past exhaustion, nursed the sick, and patched the broken, forming the essential safety net that allowed for a continuity of purpose and ultimately a successful journey. After enduring months of endless plains, the parched deserts, and the looming challenges of mountain ranges, the final stretch of the Oregon Trail brought a momentous shift in sensory experience and psychological landscape. The pervasive scent of dust and sagebrush slowly gave way to the invigorating aroma of pine. This distinct fragrance, carried on cooler, moister air, signified more than just a change in vegetation. It was the tangible embodiment of the promise of Oregon, a powerful, almost intoxicating beacon that propelled the weary but resolute travelers towards their ultimate goal. The approach to the Willamette Valley, particularly after traversing the arid regions of present-day Idaho and eastern Oregon, was marked by an increasing number of trees. The dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, dominated by Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, and western red cedar, were a stark visual and olfactory contrast to the open country. This change was not merely aesthetic, it was profoundly practical. More abundant timber meant better fuel for fires, easier repairs for wagons, and crucially, a warmer, drier camp in a region known for its rainfall. The sight of towering trees also symbolized a return to a more civilized landscape, a stark difference from the harsh wilderness that had been their constant companion for so many months. For the emigrants, the scent of pine was a powerful psychological trigger. It represented the imminent fulfillment of their long-held dreams, the end of the 2,000-mile ordeal. Journal entries from this final leg of the journey often express a triumphant, renewed energy, despite the physical exhaustion that surely remained. The promise of fertile farmland, of safe passage through the final mountain barriers, like the formidable Dalles and the Columbia River Gorge, and of a new life free from the relentless hardships of the trail, infused their spirits. Dr. John D. Unruh Jr.'s comprehensive historical account emphasizes the overwhelming relief and emotional outpouring in these final weeks. Nightly encampments, though still requiring vigilance, took on a different tenor. The anxieties about water, graze, and exposure began to recede, replaced by discussions of land claims, community building, and the establishment of permanent homes. The scent of pine, therefore, was not merely a natural phenomenon. It was the sweet smell of impending success, a potent psychological comfort that allowed for a relaxation of the mind. This enabled a deeper, more peaceful sleep, a restful prelude to the new life that lay just beyond the next winding trail. As the towering pines grew denser and the Oregon Territory's renowned rains began to fall, the emigrants knew their epic journey was drawing to a close. The nights, still spent beneath the protection of the wagon, now held a unique duality. Immense relief mingled with a pervasive sense of nostalgia. This was often the last night's rest before the arrival point, a bittersweet farewell to the open sky that had been their blanket, guide, and witness for thousands of miles. The final leg of the trail often involved navigating the difficult passage through the Cascade Mountains, typically culminating at Oregon City, the provisional capital of the Oregon Territory. For those who arrived in the wet autumn and winter months, the contrast with the dry plains was stark. While the rain made for muddy, arduous travel, it also symbolized the fertile lands they had journeyed so far to claim. The physical dangers were largely diminished, supplanted by the immediate challenges of finding land, building shelter, and establishing new lives. The need for the defensive wagon circle became obsolete, replaced by anticipation of 4 solid walls. For the settlers, this last night sleeping in their wagons, under the open, if cloud-covered sky, was laden with emotion. There was profound gratitude for having survived. Of the nearly 400,000 who embarked on overland trails, tens of thousands did not complete the journey. The statistics of death, disease, and accident were ever present in their minds, haunting the memories of those who made it. Yet, there was also a quiet reflection on the nearly 6 months spent intimately connected to the raw elements, to the rhythm of the sun and stars, and to the unwavering bond of their fellow travelers. The familiar squeak of the wagon, the distant hoot of an owl, the smell of damp earth. These had become the unexpected comforts of their existence. Historians like John M. Farragher point out that many emigrants, once settled, chronicled a deep sense of loss for the communal life and the intense experiences shared on the trail, even as they embraced the comforts of permanent settlement. This final slumber, then, was more than just a physical rest. It was a moment of profound psychological transition, a conscious closing of one chapter and the hesitant opening of another. The open sky, once a symbol of vulnerability, now represented a hard-won freedom, and the last night's rest offered a brief, peaceful interlude before the dawn of their new, promised life began. After weeks of relentless travel, marked by the constant creak of wagons and the daily rhythm of survival, the moment of arrival was often anticlimactic in its immediate sensation, yet profoundly significant in its long-term meaning. For the weary emigrants, touching the soil of the Oregon Territory signified more than just reaching a geographical destination. It was about fulfilling a deeply personal and collective prophecy. This was the land of dreams, the culmination of a perilous journey, and the true beginning of a new way of life where the pursuit of safe sleep would transition from a nightly struggle to a foundational element of home building. The final destination for many on the Oregon Trail was the Willamette Valley. Reports from missionaries and early explorers painted pictures of abundant fertile land, mild climates, and flowing rivers. These accounts, often circulated back east, fueled the dreams of hundreds of thousands. Upon arrival, the initial tasks were immense: staking a land claim, often under the Donation Land Claim Act, constructing rudimentary shelters, and preparing for the first winter. These first weeks and months were a flurry of activity, where the skills honed on the trail, resourcefulness, cooperation, and sheer grit, were immediately put to new uses. The transition from a nomadic existence to permanent settlement brought with it a different kind of safe sleep. No longer dictated by the defensive wagon circle or the threat of stampeding livestock, safety was now about building robust shelters that offered protection from the elements and a sense of permanence. The first homes were often simple log cabins or even sod houses, constructed with arduous labor. The priority was warmth, dryness, and a degree of security that the open prairie could never offer. For families who had endured months of sleeping on hard ground or in cramped wagons, the prospect of a proper roof and 4 walls was a profound luxury. Expert historical accounts indicate that while the physical comfort of a bed might still be a distant dream, the psychological comfort of a fixed dwelling, providing genuine shelter from storms and wild animals, offered a new level of security that allowed for truly restful sleep. The sound of rain on a solid roof, rather than drumming on canvas, became a soothing lullaby. The land of dreams was not just about fertile soil. It was about reclaiming the fundamental human need for a safe and secure place to lay one's head, a promise of peace that fueled their arduous journey. Touching the soil of their new home was, in essence, touching the promise of a safe and permanent rest. The journey along the Oregon Trail, a monumental act of migration spanning over 2 decades, etched an indelible mark not only on the physical landscape of the American West, but, more profoundly, on the collective psyche of the nation. The trials endured, the lives lost, and the sheer audacity of the undertaking forged a legacy that transcends mere historical fact. It is the enduring spirit of the settlers, a spirit of resilience, innovation, and community that continues to echo through generations, forever changed by their experience of seeking safe sleep and new beginnings in the wilderness. Though the last wagon trains rolled across the plains in the 1880s, the lessons learned about survival, adaptability, and mutual aid on the trail remained potent. The circular formation of wagons, initially a defensive strategy, evolved into a symbol of community and collective purpose, a microcosm of the nascent settlements forged in the Pacific Northwest. The continuous vigilance, the methodical routine, and the resourcefulness born of necessity became foundational characteristics of frontier life. These traits, honed under unimaginable pressure, were passed down through families, shaping regional cultures and the broader American character. The narratives of the Oregon Trail, meticulously preserved in diaries, letters, and historical accounts, offer invaluable insights into human endurance. We find tales of profound sorrow alongside moments of unexpected joy, devastating loss countered by an unyielding hope. From the children's laughter around the campfire to the quiet strength of women nurses and the heavy burden of leadership, every aspect of the journey contributed to a complex understanding of what it meant to seek safety in an untamed land. Ultimately, how did early settlers sleep safely on the Oregon Trail? Is not a question with a single, simple answer. It is a story woven from countless threads. The pragmatic choice of a wagon circle, the constant battle against disease and wildlife, the psychological fortitude required to face down despair, the ingenuity born of desperation, and the profound support systems that allowed a fragile community to survive against overwhelming odds. The enduring legacy of these settlers lies not just in the lands they claimed, but in the spirit they cultivated, a spirit that reminds us of humanity's incredible capacity to adapt, to persevere, and to build a future, even when facing the deepest fears and the most challenging nights, all in the pursuit of a safe and prosperous tomorrow.